Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're a researcher or, just someone who really gets into complex topics, you probably felt it, that moment. You're staring at a pile of articles, maybe your own notes, trying to figure out how one bit connects to the next. Or worse, maybe realizing your own big idea feels, well, kind of like a bunch of cool thoughts that don't quite hang together. It's a really common struggle, actually, even for people who have been doing this for years, weaving it all into something coherent. So today, we're unpacking the secret weapon that makes it all click. Alignment. Think of it like a conceptual funnel, or maybe even better, the golden thread that ties every single piece of your research together, from that first spark of an idea right through to your final analysis.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, maybe even a bit surprising, is that it sounds like, academic jargon, right? Alignment. But studies actually show a huge chunk of dissertation delays, research rejections. They often trace right back to poor alignment. So it's not just about ticking boxes or getting good marks or committee approval. It's really the fundamental thing you need for a study that's rigorous, that's feasible, and ultimately that actually means something. When your research is properly aligned, it doesn't just fit like a puzzle piece into what's already known. It actually completes part of that puzzle, which makes it way more relevant, more applicable. It ensures your work genuinely helps your field by filling in what's truly missing.
Okay, so this golden thread idea, I like that. Where do we even begin? Where is the absolute starting point for a study that's lined up properly?
That first stitch, yeah, or the bedrock, as you put it. It's always the problem statement. And it's not just like a general area you find interesting. It has to be that specific, identifiable thing, that intellectual itch, maybe, or a missing link, an unanswered question, a real-world issue, that thing your research is actually trying to solve. It's the why. Why does this study even need to exist?
An intellectual itch. I love that phrase. But I can hear some people thinking, isn't it better to start broad, cast a wide net? Is there a risk in being too general?
Oh, absolutely. That's a critical point. This problem statement, it has to be incredibly well-defined. It needs to be narrow, focused, relevant to your field, obviously, crystal clear. Specific if it's not. Well, you might end up like Dr. Chris Deason described, basically doing 2 dissertations when you only had to do 1. He told this story, this cautionary tale, about having 6 really broad research questions in his early drafts. A committee member warned him, that's going to add 3 months to your graduation for each extra question. Kind of pushed back, insisted, and bam.
Yeah.
His dissertation ended up being 300 pages long.
Wow. 300 pages out.
Exactly. So the specificity of your problem statement is just key to making your study realistic, achievable. Yeah. And this well-defined problem, it then leads you straight to identifying a very specific gap in what's already out there in the literature. Sometimes, like Dr. Deason found, maybe only 2 or 3 people have ever really looked at that precise intersection of ideas. That's how you really find what's missing.
3 months per question. Terrific. Okay, so you find that gap, that specific gap. Then your research is really set up to make a genuine contribution. And this is where that funnel idea really clicks, doesn't it? You start broad, looking at everything in the field, and you funnel down, down, down to find that specific gap. And then you formulate your precise problem. That problem becomes the foundation, right? The narrowest point at the bottom of the funnel. Everything else flows from there.
Exactly. And that raises the next big question. How do we make sure everything does flow? That alignment chain, as you called it.
Yeah.
How do we keep it tight? It has to be this logical, step-by-step progression. From your research questions to your objectives, then your data, the instruments you use, and finally, your analysis. Think of it like interlocking puzzle pieces, or maybe like a lock and key. The language, the terms, the core ideas they need to be really similar, maybe even identical across all those pieces. That consistency, that is the golden thread in action.
Okay, so we've got the broad problem, we've found the gap, now we're framing specific questions. But I know this is often a tricky spot for researchers, that difference between research questions and research objectives. Sounds similar, but it's critical, right? How do you explain that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a common point of confusion, but the distinction is vital. Your research questions, the RQs, those are the specific things you're trying to find out. The precise queries your study wants to answer, they're the what and how of the research. They need analysis, depth, and crucially, you shouldn't be able to answer them with a simple yes or no. They are the core intellectual puzzles you're trying to solve.
Okay, the what's and how, the puzzles.
And then your research objectives, the ROs, those are the specific goals you aim to achieve. They represent the actual actionable steps you'll take to answer those RQs. In mixed method studies, this is especially clear. The RQs are absolutely central because they literally drive the methods used. They dictate the whole research design, sample size, sampling approach, the instruments, the surveys, the interview guides, even the stats or qualitative analysis techniques you pick. This is really where that alignment chain starts to become concrete.
It really sounds like getting those RQs right is just fundamental for the whole project. So how do we actually do that? How do we write really strong guiding RQs? What makes a good one?
You're spot on. They are paramount. Strong RQs really boil down to a few key things: focus, researchability, and feasibility. There's a useful checklist people use. The finer criteria. Is the question feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant? If your question doesn't tick those boxes, you might be setting yourself up for trouble later on. And building on finer quantitative RQs, they're very specific, right? Designed to measure things. They tend to fall into three main types. First, you've got descriptive questions. These aim to quantify responses, often starting with what is or what are. Like, what is the average monthly screen time among high school students in, say, urban versus rural settings? Just establishing the facts. Second, comparative questions. These compare two or more groups on some outcome. They often use words like differ or compare. For example, what is the difference in levels of statistics anxiety between undergrad male and female students in STEM programs? Looking for variations. And third, relationship-based questions. These look at trends or links between variables. They use terms like relate, relationship association. Maybe, what is the relationship between perceived workload and job satisfaction among ER nurses? Understanding connections. Oh, and a key pitfall here. Try not to start quantitative RQs with do, does, is, or are. Why? Because they usually lead to a simple yes-no answer, and that just doesn't give you enough room for the kind of analysis you need.
That makes total sense for numbers. Very precise. But if quantitative is about measuring and often testing hypotheses, how do qualitative questions work? They seem, I don't know, more exploratory.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Qualitative RQs are definitely different. They're inherently open-ended. Often they evolve a bit as you go, and they're non-directional. They're designed to seek to discover, maybe explore a process or describe experiences. They usually tackle what and how questions, aiming for that rich, nuanced understanding. So you'll see verbs like discover, understand, explore, describe, report. For example, how do gang leaders select new members in high-crime urban areas? Like, what's the process? Or what are the lived experiences of parents caring for children diagnosed with autism? How do they navigate daily life? Typically, a qualitative study might have one main central question and then maybe 5 to 7 sub-questions supporting it. This gives you focus, but also that flexibility to dig deeper as you learn more.
Okay, and then what about mixed methods? When you're using both approaches, how does that show up in the research question? Do you just kind of staple them together?
Staple them together. Well, not quite. Mixed methods RQs are really interesting because they do more than just combine. They actually embed both quantitative and qualitative questions within a single framework. They explicitly bridge the two methodologies, showing you'll use both kinds of data. For instance, you might ask, to what extent do quantitative measures of academic stress predict student dropout rates? There's the quant part. And how do students qualitatively describe their reasons for considering dropping out? There's the qual part. You can see the integration right there in the question. It often implies how the two parts will connect, maybe sequentially or to explain something.
Right, so the question itself signals the integration. Okay, so now we understand the research question. Let's move to the how. That brings us to the objectives. You said these are more practical, the actionable tasks that make the research aim measurable.
Exactly. And for writing strong objectives, the SMART acronym is super helpful. You want them to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So let's take an example. If your qualitative RQ was, how do employees perceive digital transformation in retail HR? A corresponding SMART objective could be to assess employee perceptions of digital transformation in retail HR by conducting semi-structured interviews with 15-20 employees by the end of Q3. C. Specific action, measurable outcome, achievable scope, relevant, timely. Or for that quantitative RQ, do student self-care practices predict the well-being score of engineering graduate students? An objective might be to determine whether student self-care practices predict well-being scores in engineering grad students using a validated survey and regression analysis within the next 6 months. Notice how objectives usually kick off with strong action verbs. Observe, assess, identify, determine, compare. They make it clear what you're actually going to do.
And you usually see, 1 to 3 objectives for each research question? Though I guess sometimes an RQ might just be a step towards answering a bigger question, so it might not need its own separate objective listed out.
That's right. It's not always a perfect one-to-one mapping. Some RQs are intermediate steps. The key is that every RQ has a clear pathway through your objectives to get answered, even if not every single RQ translates into a standalone objective on your list. It's about ensuring the overall logic holds. Now, speaking of logic holding, there are definitely some common ways researchers get tripped up in this alignment process, pitfalls to watch out for. One of the biggest, as we heard with Dr. Deason, is just having too many RQs. It makes the study huge, unmanageable. You get bogged down. Another classic mistake is putting the method in the RQ. Like the question itself dictates the method instead of focusing on the actual phenomenon. So instead of asking, what are students' attitudes, you ask, using surveys, what are students' attitudes? The method decision comes later, driven by the question.
Right. Don't put the cart before the horse.
Exactly. We also see vague verbs or questions that are just too simple. They don't allow for real analysis, like asking, what is the impact of X? Well, what kind of impact? On whom? Under what conditions? It's too broad. Oh, and double-barreled questions, trying to ask two different things in one question, like, what are the perceptions A&D coping mechanisms of nurses experiencing burnout? Those two separate things. You need two separate questions to answer that properly. And then there's just the general lack of coherence, where the purpose says one thing, the RQs ask something slightly different, and the data collected answers something else entirely. The thread is broken.
So thinking about how to avoid all that, it really loops back to what you said about consistent language, doesn't it? Using the exact same terminology for your key ideas, your variables, all the way through. Problem, purpose, RQs, objectives, like that K-12 online education example you mentioned from the sources. The author stuck with K-12 online education or online learning. They weren't suddenly throwing in digital classrooms or virtual pedagogy halfway through without defining them or linking them back. That consistency just avoids so much confusion. For the reader, sure, but honestly, probably for yourself too. You definitely don't want to introduce some brand new concept in your results chapter that wasn't even hinted at in your questions. It just doesn't fit. Like adding a random ingredient at the end of baking a cake.
Spot on. And beyond just the words, you absolutely have to do those feasibility and ethics checks nice and early. Can you actually get the data you need? Can you reach the people you need to talk to? Is your timeline realistic? And think about the sensitivity of your topic. Can you ethically ask these questions? Can you realistically expect honest answers? Will it take ages just to build enough trust? Importantly, thinking through ethical RQs and good hypotheses actually helps prevent studies that are impossible to finish, or worse, that might cause harm. If your question relies on interviewing, say, a super vulnerable group you just can't ethically access, well, then that question isn't feasible, is it? And related to that are the validity and credibility considerations. How do you ensure your findings are trustworthy? For quantitative stuff, we talk about validity. Does your survey measure what it claims to? And reliability is consistent. For qualitative, we often use terms like trustworthiness or credibility. How do we build that? Well, strategies like triangulation are key, using multiple sources, maybe interviews, observations, documents to see if the findings converge. There are also member checks, taking your initial interpretations back to the participants. Does this ring true for you? Did I capture your experience accurately? And keeping reflexive journals is important too. Documenting your own biases, assumptions, how you might be influencing the research, it adds transparency. All these things reinforce that golden thread, making sure your answers genuinely reflect the questions you asked.
Okay, that's a lot to keep track of, especially when you're deep in the weeds of planning. So how do you practically manage all these connections, make sure everything really locks in, as you said, especially with all these moving parts?
Yeah, it can feel like juggling. A really practical tool is to build an alignment table or a matrix. Seriously, just draw up a table. Columns 4, research question, objective data needed, instrument analysis plan. Then you fill it in for each RQ. It gives you this visual check. You can literally see if there's a logical connection flowing across each row. Is the objective clearly addressing the RQ? Is the data specified going to meet that objective? Does the instrument actually collect that data? And does the analysis plan fit the data and the question? It helps you spot gaps or inconsistencies immediately, like checking every single link in that chain. And this table, this whole process of mapping out your alignment, it's also perfect for your supervisor review strategy. This is such a great time to get feedback from your committee members or your supervisor. You can literally show them the process, show them your table, walk them through how everything connects. When you present that alignment clearly, it really helps with getting approvals. But more than that, it supports that iterative process of refining your study. They can look at your alignment table and say, I see a potential issue here, or have you considered this? It lets them help you catch problems early, which saves you just heaps of time and frustration down the road.
Right, so it's not just for you, it's a communication tool with your advisors too. Makes sense. So If we kind of zoom out and connect this all back, it feels like the core message is that truly strong research isn't just about having a good idea or collecting data. It's really built on this super strong foundation of alignment. It's about that coherence. Starting with that precise problem and gap, crafting those focused questions and actionable objectives, and then making absolutely sure your data, your instruments, your analysis all map perfectly back. It's about creating that coherent whole, that unbroken golden thread we talked about. That's what allows your work, even if it's very specific, to make a real significant impact. And I guess that alignment needs to carry right through to the end, right? Into your discussion, your conclusion, bringing it all back to that original problem and gap.
Absolutely. That thread needs to run all the way through. And, beyond just getting the marks or the approvals, really understanding and applying this alignment thinking helps you genuinely serve your field. It helps ensure you're tackling what's truly missing from the conversation, not just, what seems easy or convenient to study. It really transforms your research from just like an academic task into potentially a vital piece of that bigger knowledge puzzle. So the question for you, the listener, maybe is, with this idea of alignment clear in your mind, what unique missing link are you going to choose to explore next? How will you make sure your research truly makes its mark?
A fantastic thought to leave everyone with. Thanks for tuning into the deep dive. We really hope this exploration of research alignment helps you on your own journey, whether you're just starting out or refining your next big project. Hopefully it makes things not just maybe a bit easier, but definitely more impactful.